In this video, I am going to cover my top 10 games that didn't just push the PlayStation 1, but can hold up against games coming out today. 1. Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night isn't just one of the best games on the PS1, it's one of the most important games ever made. Released in 1997 at a time when most developers were shifting hard into 3D, Konami made a bold move, go deeper into 2D instead, and it paid off big time with this legendary game. The game is a visual masterpiece. From the stained glass windows of the castle chapel to the moonlit halls of Dracula's keep, every environment looks like it was pulled from a Gothic painting. The pixel art is absurdly detailed. The animations, smooth and elegant. But the visuals were just the beginning. What really set Symphony of the Night apart was the way it redefined what a Castlevania game could be. Gone were the strict level-by-level stages of the old days. Instead, you had one giant, interconnected world, a sprawling castle that begged to be explored. And when you finally thought you'd seen everything, you flipped the castle upside down. Literally, the RPG elements added a whole new layer of depth. You could level up, equip new weapons and armor, and discover hidden powers that changed the way you moved and fought. Alucard wasn't just another Belmont. He was a vampire hybrid with access to swords, spells, familiars, and transformations. Bat, Mist, Wolf, you became the knight. And then there's the soundtrack. Oh man, that soundtrack. Every area had its own haunting, unforgettable melody. From elegant Baroque compositions to crunchy electric guitars, it didn't just set the mood, it defined it. Even today, people still listen to these tracks outside of the game. But maybe the most incredible thing about Symphony of the Night is how well it still plays. The controls are tight, the exploration is satisfying, and the pacing is near perfect. It didn't just survive the shift to modern gaming, it inspired an entire genre. The Metroidvania label exists because of this game. Without it, titles like Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, or Blasphemous might not even exist. So yeah, 2D wasn't dead in 1997. In fact, Symphony of the Night showed the world that 2D could still be art. And decades later, it still stands tall as one of the PS1's most timeless masterpieces. Number 2. Silent Hill. When people think of survival horror on the PlayStation 1, they usually think Resident Evil. But Silent Hill was something else entirely. This wasn't about jump scares or cheap thrills. This was about dread, paranoia, the kind of fear that crawls under your skin and stays there. Released in 1999, Silent Hill took the technical limitations of the PS1 and turned them into atmosphere. That dense fog, it wasn't just creepy, it was a creative solution to the console's limited draw distance. But instead of feeling like a compromise, it became a signature. You couldn't see what was ahead, you barely knew what was behind, and that made everything feel claustrophobic, isolated, like the town itself wanted you to stay lost. And then there's the audio, not just music, noise. Akira Yamaoka's industrial soundtrack mixes sirens, metallic screeches, and ambient drones in a way that feels wrong, but perfectly right. The result, you're on edge the entire time, even in safe areas. There's no comfort here, only tension. The story too was unlike anything else at the time. Silent Hill didn't hold your hand, it didn't explain everything. You play as Harry Mason, a regular guy searching for his missing daughter, but what you find instead is a descent into psychological horror, cults, alternate dimensions, and the kind of trauma that stays with you long after the credits roll. It's David Lynch meets survival horror, and it's genius. And while Resident Evil felt like a B-movie, Silent Hill felt like a nightmare. Not because of what you saw, but because of what your brain filled in. The lo-fi graphics didn't hurt the experience, they enhanced it. You couldn't quite make out the shapes in the distance or the things on the walls, and that made them even scarier. Even today, Silent Hill remains one of the most atmospheric games ever made. It didn't need photorealism, it just needed a foggy street, a broken radio, and the constant feeling that you were never alone. This game didn't just scare players, it redefined horror in gaming. And more than 2 decades later, its influence is still felt everywhere. Number 3, Metal Gear Solid. When it dropped in 1998, Metal Gear Solid didn't just raise the bar, it obliterated it. Up until then, most PS1 games were still figuring out how to balance story and gameplay. But Kojima, he delivered a cinematic stealth thriller that made players feel like secret agents. This wasn't about running and gunning. This was about thinking, sneaking, outsmarting. You didn't just fight your enemies, you outmaneuvered them, and every choice felt like it mattered. But let's talk about what truly made it legendary, the storytelling. Metal Gear Solid had fully voiced characters with real emotional weight. Solid Snake wasn't a silent hero, he was human, jaded, sarcastic, vulnerable, and the people around him, Meryl, Otacon, Gray Fox, each one had depth, conflict, and unforgettable moments. And then there were the boss fights. not just mechanically creative, but narratively rich. Psycho Mantis didn't just fight you, he read your memory card. He made your controller move. He forced you to plug into controller port 2 just to survive. Who does that? That wasn't just cool, it was revolutionary, and Kojima didn't stop there. He blurred the line between the game and the player. A codec frequency hidden on the game's physical CD case. A hallway littered with the bodies of soldiers you never even touched. It felt like the game knew you were playing, and it challenged you accordingly. Even the limitations of the PS1 didn't hold it back. The visuals pushed the hardware to the edge, using clever camera angles and stylized environments to tell its story. And the voice acting? Still some of the best ever recorded for a video game. Metal Gear Solid wasn't just about espionage. It was about loyalty, identity, war, the cost of heroism. It made you question who the real enemies were. It made you question yourself. This wasn't just a game you played. It was one you remembered. Scene for scene, line by line. And even decades later, no one's ever quite done it like Metal Gear Solid. Number 4, Final Fantasy IX. If Final Fantasy VII was the revolution, and Final Fantasy VIII was the experiment, then Final Fantasy IX was the love letter. Released at the very end of the PlayStation 1's life cycle, Final Fantasy IX felt like Square Enix's farewell to an entire era of gaming. But instead of going out with something dark or futuristic, they went back to their roots. Knights, castles, magic, airships, and somehow made it feel fresh all over again. From the moment the opening theme swells and you see the rooftops of Alexandria, you know you're stepping into something special. This wasn't just another JRPG, it was art. It was emotion, it was everything the series had been building toward. Visually, it pushed the PS1 to its absolute limits. Every background was a hand-painted masterpiece. The character models were expressive and stylized, choosing charm over realism and winning because of it. This was a world that felt alive. From the forests of Evil Forest to the mechanical city of Lindblum, every location was unforgettable. But the real heart of FF9, the characters. Zidane, the smooth-talking thief with more soul than swagger. Garnet, the princess who wants more than her royal title. Steiner, the uptight knight who slowly grows a heart. And Vivi, the shy little black mage who quietly delivers one of the most profound existential arcs in all of gaming. His journey, it hurts, in the best way. And then there's the music. Nobuo Uematsu called Final Fantasy IX his favorite soundtrack in the entire series. And it shows. From the whimsical Vamo a la Flamenco to the heart-wrenching You're Not Alone, every track hits with purpose and emotion. The music doesn't just set the mood, it becomes a character in the story. Gameplay-wise, it was polished to perfection. Turn-based combat with a classic job-style twist, equipment that teaches abilities, an addictive card game side quest, and secrets, so many secrets. It was a world begging to be explored and rewarded you for doing it. Final Fantasy IX didn't try to be edgy. It wasn't chasing trends, it was honest, whimsical, emotional, thoughtful. It reminded us that fantasy doesn't have to be dark to be powerful. And now, decades later, it's aged like a fine wine. Ask any fan of the series and you'll find that for many, FF9 isn't just underrated, it's their favorite. If you've never played it, do yourself a favor. Grab the remastered version and lose yourself in one of the most beautiful, heartfelt adventures ever made. Because Final Fantasy IX isn't just a PlayStation 1 classic, it's a timeless story that still speaks to the soul. Number 5, The Legend of Dragoon. Released in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in North America, this was Sony's bold attempt to create a first-party RPG that could rival the giants. Final Fantasy, Chrono Cross, Xenogears, and what they delivered wasn't just a JRPG, it was a 4-disc epic, a visual showcase, a cult classic that still has fans begging for a remake over 2 decades later. The first thing that hits you is the presentation, massive CGI cutscenes, full motion video intros, stylized 3D backdrops with dramatic camera angles and cinematic flair. For many gamers, this was their first time seeing an RPG look this big. You didn't just play through the story, you watched it unfold like an anime blockbuster. And the combat system, still one of a kind. Rather than the usual press attack, wait and watch formula, Legend of Dragoon introduced additions, timed button presses that made every strike feel active and skill-based. And when you unlocked Dragoon transformations, suddenly the entire battlefield lit up with elemental power and divine fury. Every party member had a unique Dragoon form, complete with flashy armor, devastating magic, and soaring wings. It felt earned, epic, worth the build-up. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was the core of the game's identity. But Legend of Dragoon isn't just remembered for its battles. The story packs weight, a war-torn world, generational trauma, Ancient dragons, betrayals, reincarnations, lost love, and a fate far greater than any one character. Dart's quest for revenge evolves into something much larger, a fight to protect the world from an ancient catastrophe tied to his very existence. There's mystery, heartbreak, and a sense of scale most RPGs still struggle to match. And the music, underrated for sure, but haunting and emotional. From the serene town themes to the pulse-pounding boss fights, it fits the world perfectly, even if it was more subtle than Square's bombastic soundtracks. The only tragedy, it never got a sequel. Despite strong sales and a dedicated fan base, The Legend of Dragoon was left behind as gaming moved into the PS2 era. And yet, it never really disappeared. Players still talk about it, still stream it, still replay it. Sony re-released it digitally, and the demand for a remake only grows louder every year. Because Legend of Dragoon wasn't just another turn-based RPG, it was bold, it was different, it was PlayStation at its most ambitious. If you've never played it, now's the time to find out why fans still call it one of the greatest hidden gems of the PS1 era. Number 6, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Some games define a genre. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, it defined a generation. Released in 2000, this wasn't just a skateboarding game, it was a full-blown cultural explosion. Kids who had never touched a skateboard suddenly knew who Rodney Mullen was. Everyone wanted to land a kickflip, and everyone knew that warehouse gap, or the feeling of finally chaining a perfect line in school too. From the moment that first guitar riff kicked in, you were hooked. The soundtrack alone is iconic. Rage Against the Machine, Bad Religion, Millencolin. It wasn't just background noise, it was the identity of the game. Every track fueled your session, syncing perfectly with the flow of your combos and bails. But it wasn't just the music. The gameplay was tight, snappy, addictive. You had 2 minutes to rack up as many points as possible, complete goals, and explore every corner of each level. And thanks to the addition of the manual, you could now chain combos across entire maps, opening up a new layer of skill and creativity that blew the first game wide open. The physics weren't realistic, and that's exactly what made it beautiful. You could grind power lines, wall ride off rooftops, and ollie over police cars in New York. Every map was a playground, every trick felt earned, and once you got into the rhythm, you couldn't stop. Just one more run turned into hours. It also gave us something few sports games did back then: personality. From the real-life pro skaters to the create a skater mode to the DIY park editor, Tony Hawk 2 made you feel like you were part of the scene. You weren't just playing a game, you were living the culture, and somehow it all fit on a PlayStation 1 disc. Fast load times, killer frame rate, even in its low-res, jagged-edge glory, the game felt smooth and alive. It ran better than it had any right to, and that's part of what made it legendary. Today we've had remakes, reboots, but nothing quite hits like the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. It wasn't just about skateboarding. It was about expression, flow, attitude. If you grew up with it, you already know, and if you didn't, fire it up, land your first 900, and see why this is still one of the most perfectly designed games of all time. Number 7, Final Fantasy Tactics. Released in 1997, this wasn't just a spin-off. It was a reimagining of what Final Fantasy could be. Less high fantasy, more medieval political drama. More betrayal, less destiny. This was Game of Thrones before most of us had even heard the name. Set in the war-torn kingdom of Ivalice, the story follows Ramza Buell, a noble-born turned outcast. And unlike typical RPG heroes, Ramza isn't chosen by fate. He's caught in a system that chews people up and spits them out. His journey is one of integrity in a world ruled by corruption, class warfare, and religious manipulation. And the writing, not just emotionally gripping, but intelligently written. Themes of loyalty, faith, power, and sacrifice are woven into nearly every conversation. Characters question the world around them, they die unexpectedly, they switch sides, and the story isn't afraid to leave you feeling conflicted. Final Fantasy Tactics didn't hand you victory, it made you earn every inch of it on the battlefield and in the story. Even today, it remains one of the most complex and beloved tactical RPGs ever made. A game that doesn't just challenge your reflexes, it challenges your morals. And once you've seen Ivalice, you never really forget it. Number 8, Parasite Eve. Before Resident Evil ruled horror and before Final Fantasy hit the big screen with Spirits Within, Squaresoft quietly dropped one of the most ambitious, atmospheric, and utterly unique games of the PS1 era. It was called Parasite Eve, and it wasn't just a game, it was a cinematic event. Released in 1998, Parasite Eve was a bold fusion of survival horror and turn-based RPG. It played like Resident Evil but felt like Final Fantasy. A science fiction horror story wrapped in a real-time combat system that somehow felt fresh, even now. Set in a haunting, hyper-detailed version of New York City, you play as Aya Brea, an NYPD officer pulled into a bizarre biological nightmare after a woman bursts into flames during an opera performance. Yes, literally combusts on stage. And that moment, it's not just shocking, it's unforgettable. From there, the story dives into genetic horror, mitochondria gone rogue, human evolution, and the line between science and madness. It's complex, yes, but never overwhelming. It pulls you in one horrific discovery at a time. And Aya, she's not just another generic RPG protagonist. She's grounded, human, relatable. She doesn't wield a sword the size of a skyscraper. She carries a sidearm and raw determination. Watching her unravel the mystery while confronting her own memories makes the story feel personal. The combat system was revolutionary. It combined turn-based structure with free movement. You could dodge attacks in real time, charge your AT bar, and unleash magic-like abilities based on parasite energy. It felt tactical but urgent, and when you fought mutated rats, deformed dogs, or twisted bosses, you felt the tension. Every encounter had weight, but what really sealed the atmosphere? The music. Yoko Shimomura's soundtrack is an eerie masterpiece, haunting piano pieces, ambient electronica, and soft vocal echoes that feel like they're bleeding out of the city's abandoned streets. It doesn't just match the mood, it creates it. Graphically, Parasite Eve pushed the PS1 hard. From CG cutscenes that felt movie-worthy to the pre-rendered environments, dripping in urban grit, every frame oozed style. This was Squaresoft firing on all cylinders right before Final Fantasy VIII hit. And while the game was never quite the commercial juggernaut of its RPG siblings, Parasite Eve earned a die-hard cult following. Because it wasn't afraid to be different. It wasn't afraid to be smart, mature, and unsettling. Even today, it stands as one of the most unique experiments of the PlayStation era. A horror RPG hybrid with depth, beauty, and brains. If you've never played it, don't let it fade into the past. This isn't just a hidden gem, it's a one-of-a-kind experience that still holds up and still burns. Number 9, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Soul Reaver didn't look like a PlayStation 1 game. It looked like a dark, twisted dream powered by a console way beyond its years. Released in 1999, Soul Reaver took everything we thought we knew about the PS1's capabilities and rewrote the rulebook. Developed by Crystal Dynamics, this gothic action-adventure game stunned players with its seamless open world, voice-acted cutscenes, and zero loading screens between massive environments. Yes, you heard that right. On a system infamous for frequent loading, Soul Reaver lets you glide through massive areas without a single pause. And the way they pulled this off, through clever background streaming techniques that loaded assets dynamically based on camera angle and proximity, tech that wouldn't become mainstream until the next console generation. And then there was the shift mechanic. Soul Reaver lets you phase between the material and spectral planes in real time, transforming the environment around you. Doors warped, architecture twisted, entire puzzles hinged on this mechanic. This wasn't just cool, it was absolutely revolutionary. No fade to black, no loading bar, just bam. New reality, new rules. Visually, the game leaned into bold architectural designs, eerie lighting, and richly detailed textures that gave the ruined world of Nosgoth an unforgettable atmosphere. Soul Reaver didn't just look good, it felt alive. And let's not forget that cinematic presentation, full voice acting, a mature, brooding narrative, dynamic camera angles. It felt less like a game and more like you were living in a dark fantasy novel. How did the PS1 pull this off? By maxing out every ounce of its architecture, and then some. Soul Reaver ran so hot on the hardware that entire features were cut from the game to make it run at all. But what remained was nothing short of legendary. And its legacy? You can still see its influence in modern titles with shifting dimensions and multi-realm mechanics. Number 10, Chrono Cross. If Soul Reaver was the dark, brooding marvel, Chrono Cross was the vibrant, elegant masterpiece. Released in 2000 by Squaresoft, this spiritual successor to Chrono Trigger didn't just look amazing, it redefined what JRPGs could look and sound like on the PS1. Let's start with the visuals. Chrono Cross used a hybrid of hand-painted, pre-rendered backgrounds and gorgeously animated character models to create a lush, colorful world that felt more like an animated movie than a video game. Every scene was a work of art. Forests shimmered, oceans sparkled, cities had character and soul. And then there was the battle system. Instead of traditional turn-based combat, Chrono Cross introduced a complex, stamina-based battle system combined with an element grid that allowed deep, strategic planning. You could mix and match characters from an astonishing cast of over 40 playable allies. each with their own unique animations, accents, and backgrounds. That level of ambition, practically unheard of. But the real kicker, the music. Yasunori Mitsuda's soundtrack for Chrono Cross is still considered one of the greatest in gaming history. And yes, the PS1's limited sound hardware couldn't technically play orchestral audio natively, but Square used masterful compression and layering techniques to create a soundtrack that sounded better than some early PS2 games. Emotional, rich, unforgettable. It wasn't just the presentation, it was the ambition. The game's narrative wove parallel dimensions, identity, fate, and time travel into a surreal, philosophical journey. It dared to be abstract and artistic, and the PS1 carried it every step of the way. So how did the PS1 pull this off? By squeezing every last drop out of its CD-ROM format and 33 MHz processor, all in service of a world that still feels magical today. And even now with the Chrono Cross Radical Dreamers Edition remaster available, it's the original version that many fans say still has the most soul. The original PlayStation wasn't just a game console, it was a proving ground. A place where developers tested the limits of creativity, innovation, and raw technical skill. These weren't just great PlayStation 1 games, they were miracles of engineering and design. So now it's your turn. What PS1 games made you say, how did they pull this off? Drop your picks in the comments, I read everyone, and your suggestions might end up in the next video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more retro greatness, and I'll see you next time.